Hey everyone, I'm Ben. I'm an angel investor, former founder, and most recently spent the past 5 years at Notion. Super excited to have you on the Next Play podcast. We're bringing on great people to talk about their career moves, picking companies to start and join, behind the scenes of their decision making, and what they've learned. And today we have Chris Bakke joining us. He was the CEO of Laskie, which was acquired by X, co-founder of Interviewed, which was acquired by Indeed, CEO of 42 Floors, which was acquired by Knotel, and also managed business development for Zillow and RentJuice a while back. So super excited to have you here with us.
Good to be here. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to kick it off with your shitposting presence on Twitter. I know that.
Why not? Let's dive in.
Yeah, totally. I know that's been a big part of your journey. Can you talk a little bit about just how that's impacted your career and what that's looked like for you?
Yeah. So I started posting on Twitter, in like late 2019. And so the context was I was like 2 years into a 3-year sort of contract with Indeed post-acquisition. And so I was a board middle manager executive at a massive company that was growing quickly and like didn't really need me day to day, I felt like. It was like out of curiosity, like I had Twitter for years and years and years, never really read it, never posted. So I wasn't even really a lurker. I wish I could remember sort of what got me over there. But I think I was following a bunch of VCs, like Balaji and Paul Graham and all these different guys. And there was something about just like pure boredom that drove me over to Twitter. And for many, many months, I was just like writing sarcastic replies to their tweets just because I thought it was kind of funny. And I think like there wasn't even part of me that was like, oh, this will be helpful for networking with VCs. It was like, founders and VCs, especially at that time, were using Twitter in kind of a different way than how they're using it today. But there was a lot of like, long multi-part threads. There were a lot of like what I would call like Wikipedia regurgitation of like taking people or themes from Wikipedia and like breaking it down into threads. And like I actually like legitimately found some of that stuff interesting, but I felt like there were very few people, maybe other than like Turner Novak and Logan Bartlett at the time, who were like in the sort of tech and VC scene who were saying like funny things and sort of reacting in humorous ways to some of this. And so that's where it all started. And then when I started, when COVID happened, and then I started a company a couple months into COVID in like late 2020, I just kept doing it. Like I never stopped. It was always really fun for me. For some reason, the platform of Twitter was always more attractive than like Instagram or Reddit or YouTube or Facebook or something like that to me. And LinkedIn, 5 years ago was still like hyper professional. It didn't feel like the place for jokes and memes. And so it was just like, it was sort of up my lane, up my style of humor. And when we started Laskie, we started to notice like very early on, right when we started the company, that by shit posting and sort of replying in sarcastic ways, it was like, oh, it's like really easy to raise money because all these VCs like know about me and they're all DMing me when I'm announcing different things. And it's actually pretty easy to find customers because at that time I had maybe 15 or 20,000 followers. And so it was like, I have this like large group of founders and talent acquisition people that are following me. And so it started off like pretty accidental. And then I think as we started finding other channels hard to scale in our last company, things like cold email, things like ads, we realized that like this sort of like founder-led voice, founder-led content marketing, going direct, however you want to call it, was a super creative way of getting new customers. And so like the shit posting actually ended up being like a huge driver of our first, $3, $4, $5 million in sales at Laskie, which is pretty cool. So then I like made it more intentional, I guess, over time.
That's incredible. You might not realize this, but at some point I was on the other end of being shitposted with I had a Notion board that I used with my wife, and you and a couple of folks kind of went on it for a few days, and it was probably one of the most entertaining weeks of my life. It ended up on the front page of the New York Times and was just truly absurd.
I do remember that, and happy to play a small part in it. I always try. That always makes me happy that it was like a good experience for you. I think that there's like a line in the sand where I always try like very hard. I'm sure I get it wrong a lot, but I always try very hard where it's like, even if I'm like roasting somebody or making fun of them, like I never want this to come across in like a mean or like malicious way. It's just like, it's like a very funny, and like obviously with your background, like being early at Notion, it was like sort of this perfect like matrix of like, tech guy using Notion to manage his life that I think other people were like jumping on in different ways. And then I think Trung and myself and some others just like helped like blow that up into like a full blown meme template. But yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, no, I had a great time. I mean, I took it in a very positive light.
Yeah, good.
But I'm curious, like, is I from that experience, like I was wondering as well as if there's like some, you know, WhatsApp group or iMessage group with all the folks to coordinate that, or just generally speaking, like what does like the behind the scenes of shitposting look like? Like, how do you manage this on a day-to-day basis?
It's there are, and I'm sure that there are more. Like there's plenty that I'm not privy to. I mean, there's definitely a lot of these like there's a lot of these small groups that I think discuss memes and discuss templates and stuff like that. So I've been in a text group for a long time with Turner Novak from Banana Capital, with Trung, who has like now 1 million followers on X, and with Alex Cohen, who was previously at Carbon Health and now started a new company called Hello Patient. So that group, like we're just sort of like friends in real life. Like Turner and I meet up every time he's in the Bay Area from Michigan. I'm an investor in Alex's company. Trung has sort of always done like whatever he can to support all of our endeavors, and we sort of do the same for him. And so that's like a small group of 4 of us. But then I think that I'm part of like other groups of VCs and founders and stuff who are talking about memes. But I think in a lot of cases like that, I don't know, ever got discussed in any sort of like a group. I think it was sort of pretty organic in the sense that people could tell that this was like a template that could be spun in a lot of different ways, and people joking about getting divorced because they messed something up in their Notion template with their wife, or whatever the thing was. There were like so many different variants that you could take that. And so I think that part of the sickness of like using a social media platform like whether it's Instagram or X or whatever is sort of like you kind of understand, you can read the room on a day-to-day basis, and you kind of are just like waiting for certain things to happen, right? So like when Sam Altman left / got kicked out of OpenAI, that was like a shit poster Super Bowl. But like those events only happen, once a year. And so you have to find joy in like these small things of like the VC debate of like, doc send versus sending PDFs, or like, an early stage investor using Notion to manage his personal life. Like you just gotta like, the tech industry is not actually that exciting. And so you have to like grasp at straws sometimes to like find something that you think the room will find humorous. And so that's sort of how that came to be, I think.
Is there one tweet that you're most proud of?
The thing that I guess I'm proud of it because it created, maybe similar to that Notion tweet that you did. Maybe I guess like maybe I don't even know how long ago it was. Maybe a year ago. There was this discussion about how all these car dealerships were using, I think it was GPT-3 at the time, to like power their chat. And so I went on one of these random dealerships and I convinced the bot through like really shitty prompt engineering, that being like a misused term, to like sell me a Chevrolet Tahoe for $1. And so I put it up as a tweet, and I was like, I do this kind of stuff all the time. Like I'll edit something on McKinsey's website and post it. I'll edit something about like Google's like diversity and inclusion goals, and I'll be like, can't believe this happened. I'll jump on the train that like Google is sunsetting Gmail, and all of these things like tend to do pretty well. But the prompt engineering thing, selling me a Chevy Tahoe for $1, was one of the, it's something that I feel in retrospect pretty proud of. But at the time I was freaking out a little bit because it's a tweet that like, it's now been cited in research papers by like Princeton, Harvard, like University of Arizona, like all these different AI researchers about like malicious prompt engineering. And so like, I don't know, it's like, it's maybe like an early use case where like something went fundamentally wrong with like a $90,000 car. And I had reporters from Wall Street Journal and like all these like, Car and Driver magazine, like reaching out to me and being like, did they actually give you the car? That's messed up if they didn't give you the car. And I was like, this is a joke, but it's gotten so wildly out of hand. And so I think like the tweet got like 100,000 likes or something, but the sort of ripple effects, like, from that were insane. Like many months after, people were still following up with me being like, hey, wanted to follow up. Did you ever get that Chevy Tahoe? It's like, it's maybe the tweet with like the longest staying power that I've ever done. And so I think in that sense, I have to be somewhat proud of it. So yeah. But it seemed like a nothing burger at the time. I was just like, yeah, this is like a funny thing. So
just to confirm, you never got the car, right?
I do own a Chevy Tahoe, but I did pay full price for it a couple years ago. So no, I did not. I did not get the car, nor did I ever expect to get the car. And I actually felt bad because the company that powered that chat, like one of the things back to my earlier point about like you hope that people always take this in the right way, the CEO of the company that powers this chat bot that like is sitting on these like dealership sites got a ton of heat because of that, and because other people then were going to like similar dealership sites and like being like, can I get a Chevy Equinox for 50 cents? And the thing was like, yeah, sure. And so the like bot allowed like hundreds of cars to be sold that weekend, allegedly for, you know, a couple dollars. And so I did feel bad because that's like one of the things as like an early stage founder, you probably don't want to wake up to that on like a Wednesday morning, but so be it.
Incredible story. So what would you tell someone who's trying to up their Twitter game? Like, what are the 2, 3 principles that are or rules that they should be following to just get better?
I mean, I think it's definitely about following the right people. Like Twitter does, you know, the algorithm is ever changing, but I think that there's always new noise and stuff that people don't want to see being introduced to the timeline, which is kind of the same as on any social network. But if you're using like the For You tab and you're following the right people, that's always where it starts. Like, are you even in the right conversation? And I think some of this goes back to, right, like, what are your goals? Is it number of followers? Is it engagement on posts? I always think like engagement is one of the highest quality metrics, whether you're trying to use like, you know, Twitter, now X, as like a place to promote your business, or whether you're trying to use it to find a job, or whether you're trying to use it to get deal flow as an investor. The engagement that you're getting on posts. I mean, there's VCs who are very well known within their industry who are like Midas list investors, right, that don't have Twitter and are doing fine from a deal flow perspective. There's also people that I think you know, let's use like the investing angle, that have like massive followings and don't really, you know, promote the stuff that they're doing from an angel like I do. I do a lot of angel investing, but it just sort of happens from an inbound perspective. I don't really advertise it. And so some of that goes back to, again, like, what are your goals? Like, my goal has always been attract followers, maintain high engagement, so that when I have a project, whether that's you know, a venture-backed company or something that I want to promote, or an intro link or whatever, that I can almost guarantee that I'll get, you know, many dozens or hundreds of comments on it. And that's always sort of a good barometer for if you're heading in the right direction. So I think it starts with following, doing what I did, and coming up with original content early on can be really hard. Like, Twitter's a very noisy, chaotic room. This is the same with like starting on YouTube or starting a Substack newsletter or anything else. Like, kind of getting a sense of what people are already talking about and being able to read that room is helpful. And so replying to other people is the best way to get started. I think people get frustrated where they come up with their own content and for many months or years it doesn't really perform. But there's so many examples of people that are leaving thoughtful replies, witty replies, adding to the conversation, whatever, as sort of these like reply guys. But it definitely works, right? It helps you attract followers, because you don't need to be the one with the viral tweet. You just need to be able to like chime in when somebody has one. So following the right people, replying a lot, and then just consistency. I think that's the other big thing is most people, they come and go from these platforms. But if you look at the people, there's so many like mediocre accounts that have hundreds of thousands of followers on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on Instagram. And you look at the consistency and it's always just like, they've posted every day for 6 years, right? Like, I think people admire one person that has a very not mediocre account, but somebody who's like, I think just doing stuff that a lot of people in the real world are actually doing, is somebody like a Peter Levels. Like, Levels.io is his handle. He has like 450,000 followers. And people are always like, you know, how is this guy able to attract 500,000 people from building these kind of like, as of like 2 years ago, like pretty small, like little like web apps. And it's like, you look at the amount of tweets that he's posted. I think he's posted like 115,000 tweets over the last 10 years. The guy's just consistent. He shows up every day. He responds to users. He builds in public every single day. He talks about like features and changes with his apps. He talks about the income that he's making. Like, it's just a brilliant strategy that lots of people have bigger companies than him or more successful companies than him. But like, in terms of somebody who's been able to go 0 to 1 of getting users across like a bunch of different things really consistently, and then like building that audience to a place where anything he does can have users day one. I think a lot of, you know, builders and makers like want to be in that category, but they're just not consistent with it. And so I think that those are the three things. Like, you can do anything. You can be funny, you can be not funny, you can have hot takes, you can have boring takes, but if you're consistent and you're just in the conversation every day, I think you'll start to build sort of a foothold of a following.
Yeah, totally. Great advice. So I'd love to hear about your time at at X. So
Yep.
you sold your last company at X. What was your day to day like there?
It was very different from any company that I've had, as this one can imagine. So I think so backing up like a little bit so that people, sort of understand X, because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions. There's also a lot of stuff that's in the news that sounds unbelievable, but is actually true. So, to again, the best of my knowledge, the company when we were acquired had under 200 engineers. So this is a company that, at the time that Elon was buying it, was doing many, many billions of dollars in revenue. It's still doing many, many billions of dollars in revenue. At that time was serving something like 535 million unique monthly active users. And so that was all like those numbers were all at least in terms of like the monthly active users, like bigger than where I was at Indeed. And Indeed had, many, many thousands of engineers, like 12,000 total employees when I left, $8 billion in revenue. And so this company is like, literally like has like 2% of the engineering team of like a lot of its peer companies. There basically is no product layer. So I was one of 3 people at the company with a product title. And then there's basically there's almost no like leadership, if that makes sense. And so there is no, like Elon is the CTO. There's a CEO who's Linda. Other than that, like the other sort of functional offices do not exist. And so basically the way that the site runs is you're on like sort of one of 2 teams. There's like a core engineering team, and then there's like a enterprise team that's focused on, building stuff for business users that myself and my co-founder were sort of co-running with a couple other people. So basically like you get all these people together in a giant meeting with Elon once a week or a couple times a week. And you just like run through a deck of changes. And then like as you're running through the deck, he's like sitting on his phone, like looking at like the live updates. Like we'll like be like pushing changes to his phone, like in a conference room with him. And then he's like, I like this. This is kind of weird. Like he actually has like I think 75% good product intuition. And I think what I've found is like when he's wrong, he's pretty quick to reverse some of those like decisions. But like it's very like top down in terms of product decisions. So a lot of this is like, if you have a product meeting where you have 2 hours with Elon and you're trying to go through a bunch of stuff, you have to be quite intuitive into like what users are going to want, because like Elon's not necessarily going to give you ideas, but he'll be like, spam is a giant like clusterfuck. Like, what are we going to do about it? And so in a lot of cases, it's pretty much like the strongest, like the sort of best opinion in that room is going to win as like the experiment that we'll try over the next week. And we'll come back to him in a week and figure out, where we're going to go. So that's sort of how the company runs. Our thing and payments was a little bit different because the sort of 2 big bets that we've been making over the last, let's call it like 12 to 14 months were X payments and X hiring, which is basically going after sort of, PayPal-like infrastructure and going after LinkedIn type infrastructure. And so I was owning, in addition to a bunch of other enterprise stuff, my co-founder Daniel and I owned all of the X hiring stuff. And so that was a little bit separate. Like we would have separate sort of one-on-one meetings about it. We would discuss in detail sort of what we were going to do to beat LinkedIn. We would discuss in detail, like it's kind of weird. Like we were acquired to go beat LinkedIn, but Elon had never been on LinkedIn. Like he understood the company. He understood that a lot of the content that gets posted there is cringeworthy because people post screenshots of it on Twitter. But like he doesn't have a LinkedIn profile. He's never used the app. He's never been on like the web version of LinkedIn. And so like bizarrely, my first month or 2 was basically trying to like baseline with him. Like, this is how LinkedIn works. This is how job seekers use it. This is how advertisers use it. So like every day was like sitting like shoulder to shoulder with him at a big conference room table, just like showing him LinkedIn and showing him like what's good about it and what's bad about it. And he's like, let's like read your DMs and like see what people are DMing. I was like, this could be a nightmare, but it wasn't. And so, yeah, it was quite bizarre, but I think he sort of got the 80-20 of it relatively quickly. And then, our mandate was like, LinkedIn has at any given time in the US, something like 5 to 6 million open jobs. The first thing when you're going to go compete with them is get lots of active jobs. And so the first year sort of post acquisition was turning Laskie, which was a like recruitment automation platform, mostly for like mid-market and enterprise, turning that into something that like small and medium business users, as well as like Walmart, could be using through Twitter to go hire people. And so, yeah, I mean, I won't go too much further there, but like basically people have been using Twitter to hire forever and they've never monetized it. And so if you look at the opportunity, I think the exciting thing for us, and still the exciting thing, is, Twitter has like 40% more monthly active users than LinkedIn does. And LinkedIn does about 5x the revenue that Twitter does. And so if you look at the sort of diff there, a lot of that is like Twitter's advertising platform has forever been shit. And a lot of the improvements that you need to make it less shitty are understanding your users, right? Like if you have a vertical SaaS company serving CFOs, you can go on LinkedIn and be like, I want to see all the CFOs in Manhattan and I want to run ads to them and put ads in front of their face, every day for the next 45 days. Like a lot of those CFOs are still on Twitter, but like we have no idea who they are. And so you have to use all this like inference-based targeting that's been pretty loosey-goosey. And so part of the jobs thing is like, cool, if you start to map resume data, if you start to map like who's applying to what job, if you start to map who's posting the jobs, you get a pretty good sense of like the underlying careers and professions of like a lot of Twitter users, which makes advertising better in turn. So
Yeah, totally makes sense. It sounds like you were the right person to be working on a lot of this with your experience in Indeed.
Yeah, it was good. It was fun.
But was it hard going from being a founder to being an operator with a manager?
It was a lot harder at Indeed because Indeed was like, it was like a machine, right? And so like we sold, when Interviewed was acquired by Indeed in 2017, Indeed had, I don't know, like something like 3,000 employees. I was there for 3 years. When I left, it was 12,000 employees. They had like, basically 4x revenue over that period. Like everything was just like, it was like explosive growth. It's like one of the quietest companies that's doing $10 billion in revenue. Like people look at it and they're like, there's no way that this is like sort of a Craigslist competitor. Like it crushes in the space. Like hiring is basically a duopoly between LinkedIn and Indeed in the US. And then in other countries, it's like, Indeed plus Stepstone or Indeed plus Seek in Australia. And so, yeah, it's a massive company. We were fortunate that like our boss, Raj, who was the chief product officer, was like, he came from GoDaddy where he was running product for like 7 years. And he did like a dozen or 24 acquisitions at GoDaddy. And so I think one of the things that I would encourage, like you can't always get it as a perfect fit, but if you can work at a company where like your direct manager has either been a founder like Elon or is very acquisitive and has like seen good acquisitions and seen bad acquisitions, that is extremely helpful in both cases. But at the end of the day, like, we were a 12-person company at Interviewed getting pushed into this like 3,000-person company that then was growing by like hundreds of employees every month. And so that felt hard to sort of get like a foothold of like, what do I do here? And part of the advice that I think like Sean Puri has given on like My First Million that I really like is post-acquisition, like after the first 6 months, you should basically just like stop working on whatever you were acquired to do, and you should go find like the most important problems in the company and go solve those. And so the work I think I was the most proud of at Indeed was like not actually, the acquisition turned out great. It was a very successful acquisition. They made lots of money from it. But the thing that I was most proud of was after a year and a half at Indeed, my co-founder Daniel and I switched over and basically created Indeed for Enterprise, which now is like $1 billion business unit. At the time, like it did like $50 million in its first year. And our company was bought for $50 million. So it made me feel good about like, cool, they got their money back just from this one thing. Like this will go down in history as like not only a very successful acquisition, but like the founding team was able to go do other like cool, valuable stuff for Indeed while they were here. And I think that like notoriety, at least like within the jobs and talent space, was super helpful into like jumpstarting whatever we did next. Like I think investors in Laskie were very like, they were very impressed with that. We shared a lot of that upside with our angel investors. Like we had a super unique earnout structure where we were actually paying like dividends to our angel investors in Interviewed, even though it was an all cash deal. Very like unconventional, but we basically took 20% of the cash that founders and team were going to be earning over like the next 3 years at Indeed, and we paid that out to investors. So sort of like, hey, as long as we're here and we're still working hard, you as an angel or as a VC in interviewed get upside from this. And so it wasn't like significant, but there were like angels that earned like hundreds of thousands of dollars by us just like continuing to work at Indeed for 3 years. And so that made it like really easy to go back and raise money from those people again, because it felt like, cool, even though we didn't like 100x your money, we gave you a nice 10x, and then we gave you like another 5x through the earnout, which was pretty cool.
And that sounds like a fantastic outcome for early angel investors.
For a smallish deal, for a non-unicorn, it's like it's about as good as it can get for investors and for the team, I think. So
totally, yeah. Is there anything you would have done differently at X or Indeed post acquisition, looking back?
Every deal that I've done, I have every deal that I've done personally and that I've been an employee at, we get the mix of cash and stock wrong. So like, I was like an early employee, not a founder at RentJuice, but when we were acquired by Zillow, like the math is disgusting. Where like that company was acquired for like 45 million. It was all cash and it was like a big win at the time. But had we like taken stock, like, I don't know, like as an early employee, like I made like $250,000 in cash from that. And then I like earned a bunch of Zillow stock around the time that they IPO'd, which ended up being worth like the majority of what I made there. But like, if that deal had been done all stock and then we had held the stock for like just even like 3 years, that deal would have been worth like $600 million. And so it's like, and then like, similarly, like, 42 floors sold for, sort of like mostly like a stock deal. And that deal sort of like ended up imploding, and like they probably should have taken more cash. Indeed, we took all cash and like the stock would have been like hugely valuable. X, I split the difference and like the jury's still out, but we took a lot of cash and we also took like a bunch of stock. And so we'll see, depending on who you believe, that stock is either going to be worth like hundreds of millions of dollars or zero, like any, large public company that has a huge debt load. And so, yeah, we'll see. But historically, I've gotten it wrong every time, which is maybe something I would have done differently. But I think that's sort of like, it's a bit facetious because you never know. No, I don't think so. Like, I think for where Interviewed and Laskie were at, it was the right outcome. Both journeys were super rewarding, like both in terms of a monetary perspective, but importantly, like a learning perspective. Like I feel like I now sort of understand how to go 0 to 1 with new ideas on my own. I understand how to be like a senior leader at a big company. I enjoy aspects of both, which is part of why I've done this like teeter-totter of like starting a company, running it for 3 years, jumping over to the other side, selling it, being, in the matrix of like a big company that can protect you where you don't have to make every decision. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's been good and bad things about that, but I don't think that I would have really changed much about the journey.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you learned a lot. So
yeah,
that's always great.
Yeah.
So I know you shared recently that you're left X and you're on to your next thing. I'm curious to hear like what the next phase of life looks, what the next.
Yeah. So the honest truth is like leaving X was a super hard decision. Like it was sort of 3 months in the works, and didn't want to leave our team in a bad place because like the entire team, including my co-founder, are still there, and I think many of them plan to be there for a long time. And so for me, the first thing that I think people don't really talk about is founder burnout in a vertical. Like it's not even like on an idea. Like I think that there's aspects of hiring that I still really like, but in a way I've literally been a part of and thought about almost every angle of hiring. From our first company was like an assessments and video interviewing company, and then integrating that into Indeed. And Indeed is like a big job board. And so you're thinking about like job board logistics for 3 years. Then you're building out like the enterprise side of that, which is all these like applicant tracking integrations. And then Laskie was a very different company than Interviewed or Indeed, but it was like a technical hiring, recruiting automation platform. And so you're learning all about tech recruiting. And then X hiring and Twitter was like building hiring features on top of a massive social network, where the social network wasn't super intuitive to users, that this was like a platform to be used for hiring and to be used for jobs. And so like, all in all, end to end, that's been 10 years thinking about like lots of different things in hiring. And it's felt rewarding in one sense, but it's also been like, I need to go spend time doing anything else other than focusing on like hiring software for a little bit. So that was like a big part of the decision. And I think like my life has so fundamentally changed over the last 4 years. Like we've had 2 kids in the last 3 years. We have another one on the way. I sort of realized like I'm 35 for reference, and so there's been a lot of joy and success in different ways of like creating companies and selling them. But I think part of this was like, what would life be like as a full-time content creator, as a full-time investor, as somebody that was like focusing on building smaller like cash flowing businesses that didn't require venture from day one. And so I think I've just always had these different things and ideas in the back of my mind, and was at this like really fortunate intersection of like, one, legitimately feeling burnt out by the space, two, feeling like I wasn't leaving a startup to die. I wasn't leaving like an early idea to die. Like we have sort of a very strong foothold. We had something like 1.2 million jobs added to X hiring over the last year. We've hired like a really great engineering team there. The revenue is starting to sort of turn on. We're starting to see inflows, and it's cool. Like cool. I don't need to be a part of this to see it be successful. And so I think the timing just worked out, and it also felt like, I guess from a more anecdotal level, like within my network, there was this really weird timing thing where like 6 of the 10 most talented people I've ever worked with in my life historically are also at like a similar crossroads. Like they've also left jobs. They've either quit, or they've sold their company and then quit, or they've gotten fired or whatever. Like, so there's just a lot of like hyper talented people from my network on the market right now. And so I think also if you look at sort of the shifts and, the ways in which, OpenAI and similar companies have like really changed the landscape for building companies, period. It felt like there was like a lot of like low hanging fruit ideas and like things I wanted to try with some of my friends. So that was a big part of the decision too.
So are you excited, worried? Like, what do you feel kind of in this new phase of life?
It's a little bit too early to say. I mean, I think the emotions were definitely not worry, but I wouldn't say like full-fledged excitement. Like I had a lot of excitement leaving Indeed because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Like my co-founder, Daniel, and I have worked together now for over, I guess, close to 12 years. So we were at 42 floors together. We were the first 2 employees there. We interviewed together. We built Indeed assessments together. We built Indeed enterprise stuff together. We started Laskie together. We were at X together. He's now running X hiring. So part of that was like the concern was like there wasn't a clear next step for the 2 of us. And I think we're like very good friends. Our families like travel together. And so I think like, at some point we'll do something together down the line. But it was sort of this strange divergence of like, whatever it is, like I always have my sort of like engineering product counterpart, and Daniel always has his like sales go to market, somewhat product counterpart. And so we just had like really complementary skill sets. And so that I think was like the biggest question mark, where a lot of the people that I will be building small projects with and like tinkering on projects with are people that I've never like co-founded things before. And so that sort of is like, that's like exciting, but also nerve-wracking in a sense. And I think like there's no driving force of excitement because there's not like one big idea that I've found that I want to tackle. So some of that will be deliberately meandering over the next like 6+ months and figuring out like, I think maybe back to your earlier question, one of the mistakes that we made is I think we did rush into the idea of Laskie a little bit too quickly. It was like, we came out of Indeed's bad at technical hiring. We need to go build like something that solves this problem. And we did like a customer development exercise, but it was like we could have done it better. And I think we could have been a lot more open perhaps and forced ourselves to like look at new, industries, new verticals, whatever outside of hiring. But we sort of got like sucked back into a thing that we were like naturally good at that we already knew. And so I think that being more deliberate in like forcing ourselves to come up with like a software idea for home builders could have been like more interesting back in the day. But obviously it all worked out. So there's always time in the future, hopefully, for some of those things.
Yeah, I actually had on Mike, the founder of Skillshare. I don't know if you've come across his content, and he has a couple posts about like the repeat founder cycle and going through boredom and exploration and a whole bunch of phases until you kind of start the next company, which I've always was fascinating. But
Yeah, I think one of my friends who lives nearby, he used to be the CEO of a company called Dribble, right, which is like a huge like design community. So he used to live like one street down from me, but he now lives a couple blocks away, but I still see him a lot. Like he did this cool thing. It was very eye-opening. Like I hosted this dinner of 12 founders at my house, or 12 CEOs, let's call it. But one of the guys was like he was the CEO of like a very successful women's hair salon in San Francisco. One of the guys was the CEO of like a very successful commercial painting company in Oakland. And so I think some of this was like, it did open your eyes to like, oh, wow, you can take the same intensity, a lot of these same skills around like hiring and people management and allocating capital. And like you can apply it to all these other industries that like my brain had never gone to before. And it was sort of that like tunnel vision within hiring. So yeah, excited to force myself to get out of the comfort zone a little bit there.
Yeah, are there any like projects, areas that you're like really excited to dive into, or is it still too early to say?
I think like one of the things that was very accidental that I've built that I'm proud of and will be spending more time on is this site or this platform called Napa, and it's a ghostwriting platform for founders and executives. And so back to the like where do I see opportunity? I don't think it's going to be like there have been founders that have raised venture for similar things, which I think is sort of a fool's errand. But we have this thing now to over $1 million in revenue, super high margins. We're working with close to a dozen now CEOs, mostly from like larger YC backed companies. And just helping them like write and sort of tell their story. So I'm sort of involved day to day in the strategy side, but we have a really strong writer, Jameson, who's like leading the efforts there and sort of running that company day to day. So like that has been super fun for me, where it's like I love producing content, I love thinking about content, I love telling the story of how social content was so transformative for my last company. And so now being able to do that with like zero pressure from external investors, there's no like board, like Jameson and I are the board. It's the first like LLC that I've ever set up. So we're paying out cash flow, we're paying out dividends as opposed to like hoarding it all in a bank account and blitz scaling with hiring. And so it's like, even though it's at 1 point something million in revenue, it's like the most profitable company that I've ever started. We started it 6 months ago. So that's pretty cool. And I think that there are just a lot of ideas similar to that where, part of angel investing that's always, tripped me up is like getting over the hump of like, wow, I'm going to put like a 25 or 50 or $100,000 check into this company that's like worth $25 million and hope that it does well. And like somehow that math actually like tends to work out in the long run. But, the other side of it is like, can I put $10,000 into a bank account and own 50% of a company and find like a really talented operator to run it and just be involved sort of from the sidelines with, hiring and with strategy and with go to market. And so there's a lot of ideas there that I would say I'm excited about that are sort of in the like agency realm or in the like small business that will never have more than a couple employees realm, but that like is a cool thing that I think like the world needs, that, we could easily get to 250,000 to $2 million in revenue. And so maybe like sort of building a portfolio of small bets, but the grass is always greener on the other side. Like I already see that by doing that, your mind is super like conflicted in a million different directions. And it's kind of nice to have like one big North Star that you're chasing. And so it's like when you haven't raised venture, like venture funding is such a blessing. When you've raised millions of dollars in venture and you have a board and they're annoying you and you have to like go report things to them, that's annoying. And so it's just like you always kind of wish you're on the other side. And so some of this I think for me is like it's going to be trying a lot of those things on the other side to get a sense of like if it's a better fit with my personality and sort of like lifestyle. So
Yeah, I'm excited to see.
yeah.
So it seems like you've had a really incredible run and, an incredible career so far. Advice you would give to folks who are, earlier on as maybe founders, early operators, just kind of breaking in, getting into the tech world, like what would you tell folks who are early in their journeys?
Yeah, I think you have to use whatever network you have to your advantage. Like I think a lot about the path when you're early is often about eliminating and finding things that you don't want to do as much as they are finding stuff that you do want to do. Like when I graduated college and I dropped out a couple times, then restarted, But when I finally graduated, I compressed it down into 3 years so I could get out of there as fast as fucking possible. I thought for sure like the path was going to be law school and then becoming a lawyer. And then when I was taking all these like philosophy and political science and law classes, I was like, I hate this actually. So now what am I going to do? I started an internship where I was working for like a very successful real estate developer. And I was like, okay, I am going to flip houses. This is like in 2008. Then 2009 happens, 2008, 2009 happens. And I was like, I am not going to flip houses. That seems like a terrible idea. Like I just watched my boss lose like $10 million in the housing market in Los Angeles. So then it's like, okay, well, real estate private equity is pretty interesting. And so like my first job out of college somehow that I like leveraged through a mutual connection was like a job as like an analyst at a small real estate private equity company. I was like, I'll probably do this forever. And like 6 weeks into that job as a 21-year-old, I was like, this sucks. This is awful. I need to go find some. So it was like, it was ruling things out. It was like, I think so many people build up their careers in their head and then they get into it and they go, oh, this is a bad fit for whatever reason. The pay isn't as good as I thought. I actually enjoy working outdoors. I can't sit behind a desk all day, like whatever the thing is. So I got really lucky. And like by the time I was like 22, had like either quit or been fired from a bunch of stuff within my first year and a half out of college. And like I ended up like using my network every time to go figure out like, okay, I want to explore this. Who do I know who has successful parents or who has a random connection? And so my path into startups was like, I was working as an analyst at this private equity shop. I told my boss, who was like 20 years older than me, that I hated it. It's like he knew somebody who went to Harvard whose roommate was starting a company in San Francisco that was in the real estate tech space. And I was like, I don't care, I'll do that. And so I think if you're non-technical, like one of the best things that you can do is just get into sales, like sell anything. I was so like adverse to selling because it's such like an unnatural, it almost felt like such a step down. Like I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to go into like real estate private equity. It's like, my first, if you can get good at talking to people and you can get good at like sending cold emails and you can go work for, a startup for a couple of years and like prove out those chops, like I made close to 3x what I made in the first year as a real estate private equity analyst as a account executive at RentJuice, just selling real estate software to realtors. And it felt like such like a step down. And then it was like, oh, there's actually a lot of money in this. And then that made everything sort of better. And so, not being averse to using your network, not being averse to sales, even if you're technical, like trying to sell your own projects before you sort of like hire a business co-founder can be a really good step. And then I think just being open to opportunities. Like I've always tried to be very altruistic between things. So like when we sold our company to Twitter that fall, so like basically a year ago this time, I spoke to 163 YC founders for 30 minutes each, just for fun, just to like see what was broken in their business, see if there was some like content thing they needed help with. And I just posted this thing on like Bookface, which is like the sort of YC founders chat. And I was like, hey, if anybody needs help thinking about go-to-market, hiring, selling your business, whatever, here's the things that I think I'm reasonably good at. And that like altruism has turned into, I think, a bunch of like valuable friendships and like some advisory roles. And I ended up investing in some of those companies. And so it's like, if you just continue working hard, continue pushing, you never know. But just if you have gotten something from the world, whether that's money or knowledge or connections or something, like feeling like you are sort of like owed to the next generation to like repay a lot of that, I think is sort of the part of the like life cycle that I'm in right now.
Awesome. Super helpful advice. And Chris, it's been really great having you here today.
Yeah.
Appreciate you taking the time. And I'm excited to see your next play.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Awesome.